Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going way back to 5th century BC China
Oh, wow.
to explore the life and choices of the legendary Confucius.
Okay.
Specifically, we'll be examining his decision to leave the state of Lu and travel to Qi on this period of Confucius's life.
It's a period that's often misunderstood.
Yeah,
People tend to think of Confucius as a purely academic figure,
right.
removed from the political realities of his time.
And our deep dive today will unpack just how intertwined his life was with the politics of the era.
Yeah.
We'll look at the historical context, his personal motivations, and maybe even debunk a myth or two along the way.
One of the most common misconceptions is that Confucius fled Lu out of fear during a period of political turmoil.
Really?
But as our source points out, the situation was much more nuanced than that.
Okay, so let's set the scene for our listeners.
Sure.
What was going on in the state of Lu at the time?
The state was essentially ruled by the Duke of Lu, but he was constantly challenged by three powerful, noble families,
Okay,
known as the three Huan families.
I see.
Think of them as powerful clans vying for control, almost like a Game of Thrones playing out within the state.
So there was already tension and power struggles before things escalated.
Absolutely, and this tension came to a head when the Duke of Lu was exiled by the three Quan families.
Wow.
This threw the state into a brief period of civil war, but it ended quickly with the three Quan families consolidating their power.
So this is where Confucius comes in.
Right.
He was working for one of the three Quan families, right?
Yes, he was employed as a tutor and advisor,
Okay.
which, as you can imagine, put him in a very complicated position.
Because on the one hand, he's working for the very people who overthrew the Duke, but he also believes strongly in loyalty to the ruler.
Exactly.
So talk about a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. He could have easily stayed in Lu, continued to benefit from his position, and thrived under the new power structure.
But instead, he chose to follow the exiled Duke to the state of Qi.
He did.
Was this just a rash decision driven by idealism, or was there more to it?
Our source argues that it was a calculated move,
Hmm.
a strategic gamble on his part.
What makes you say that?
Well, first, think about the timing. The civil war in Lu was extremely brief.
Okay.
By the time Confucius left, things had stabilized under the three Huan families. He wasn't fleeing imminent danger.
So it wasn't so much about escaping a bad situation, but maybe about seizing a potential Okay.
Confucius was betting on the possibility of the Duke eventually returning to power.
And if that were to happen, he'd be in a prime position to benefit.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that have been a huge gamble? I mean, what were the chances of the Duke actually regaining control?
It was definitely a risk, no doubt, but the source draws a fascinating parallel with a similar situation in the state of Wei,
Uh-huh.
where officials who remained loyal to their exiled duke were rewarded with prominent positions upon his return.
So Confucius may have seen this as a historical precedent,
Yeah.
a reason to believe that his gamble could pay off. But how does this all fit into his personal philosophy and beliefs?
Right.
He was known for emphasizing loyalty, right?
Absolutely, and siding with the three Fawn families would have directly contradicted his core values. By choosing to follow the Duke even into exile, he demonstrated his unwavering commitment to the principle of loyalty to the rightful ruler.
Okay, so we're starting to see a picture of Confucius as not just a scholar and teacher, but also a shrewd political player willing to take risks to advance both his career and his ideals. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, and it's important to remember that this was a time when ambition and personal connections played a huge role in political life.
Yeah.
Confucius was no exception.
And speaking of personal connections, before we dive deeper into his motives.
It's a fascinating parallel to the grand tour that European nobles undertook centuries later.
So kind of like study abroad meets networking extravaganza for the ancient elite. Tell me more.
Well, these journeys were seen as essential for young nobles to broaden their horizons, experience different cultures, and most importantly, build relationships with influential figures from other states.
And Confucius participated in one of these study tours early in his life?
He did.
Where did he go and who did he meet?
Our source mentions a trip he took with a young noble named Nan Gong Jing Shu to Luoyang, the capital of the Zhou dynasty.
Okay.
Officially, the purpose was to report a death and seek a royal commendation.
Right.
But of course, it was also a prime opportunity for networking.
It's like LinkedIn for the ancient world, except instead of endorsing skills, they were exchanging political favors and philosophical ideas.
I like that analogy, and it's on this trip that Confucius allegedly encountered a figure in Lao Dan.
Wait, Lao Dan, as in Laozi, the legendary author of the Tao Te Ching?
Yes. Now, this is where we get into the myth-busting territory. For centuries, there's been this misconception that the Lao Dan Confucius met was actually Laozi himself.
Okay, I can see how that story would get passed down and embellished.
It meticulously debunks this myth.
Okay.
First, the timelines don't align. And more importantly, Confucius never mentions the Tao Te Ching or its author in any of his own writings,
Right.
which seems highly unlikely if they had actually met.
So if it wasn't true, why did this story become so widespread?
It seems that later schools of thought, possibly rivals of Confucianism, were trying to discredit Confucius
Oh, wow.
by inventing this tale of him being schooled by Laozi.
Wow, so even back then there were attempts to rewrite history for political purposes.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that history is often told from a particular perspective, and it's always important to question the motives of those who are shaping the narrative.
Okay, that's fascinating. But let's get back to Confucius's big decision to leave Luffy. You mentioned that it wasn't just about loyalty to the Duke. Was there a personal element at play as well?
Right.
Maybe a rivalry or a grudge?
Yes, actually, there was. Our source introduces us to a figure named Yang Hu, a rival of Confucius who had previously humiliated him.
Ooh, this is getting juicy. Tell me more about this Yang Hu and how he factors into the story.
Well, Yang Hu represents the opposite path that Confucius could have taken. He chose to side with the powerful three Huan families, demonstrating that ambition and pragmatism often won out over loyalty and idealism in these power struggles.
So you have Confucius driven by principle and a long-term vision, and Yang Hu seizing the immediate opportunity for power. What a fascinating contract.
And this rivalry adds a personal dimension to Confucius's decision.
Yeah.
It suggests that his choice wasn't solely based on abstract principles, but also on a very human desire to prove himself and perhaps even get one over on his old rival.
Okay, this is already giving us a much more nuanced and complex picture of Confucius than we usually get. So he's in Lu facing this dilemma taught between his ideals and his ambition. What ultimately tipped the scales in favor of following the exiled Duke to Qi?
That's a great question. It delves into the potential rewards. Confucius might have envisioned his understanding of loyalty in the context of political upheaval and how his actions reflect his broader philosophy.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about these potential rewards and how Confucius might have viewed them.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll need to pick up this thread and unpack those motivations in more detail.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Confucius. Last time we left off with Confucius facing a big decision, stay in the state of Lua under the new rulers, or follow the exiled Duke to the state of Qi. It was a gamble.
It was.
Fueled by loyalty, ambition, and maybe even a bit of rivalry. But you were saying there were potential rewards he might have had his eye on.
That's right. It's easy to view this decision through a modern lens, but to really understand Confucius's motivations,
Yeah.
we need to consider the political realities of his time.
So help me understand the political landscape a bit better. What kind of rewards could someone in Confucius's position realistically hope to gain by following an exiled duke?
Well, think about it. In ancient China, power was often fluid and cyclical.
Okay.
Dukes were exiled and restored all the time, so if the exiled Duke of Lu were to regain his throne, those who had remained loyal to him would be in a very advantageous position.
They'd be seen as the true loyalists.
Yeah.
And potentially rewarded with prominent positions in the government. But wasn't that a huge if?
Oh, it was.
How could Confucius be so sure that the Duke would ever return to power?
Of course, there were no guarantees. There's a case in the state of Wei where officials who followed their exiled duke were given key government roles when he eventually returned to power.
So Confucius might have seen that as a precedent,
Yeah.
a reason to believe that his gamble could actually pay off.
Exactly. And beyond the potential for political advancement, there's another layer to Confucius's motivations that we need to consider: his personal philosophy and beliefs.
Right. He was deeply committed to the idea of loyalty to the ruler, even if that ruler wasn't currently in power. Choosing to stay in Lu and serve the three Quan families would have been a betrayal of those principles.
Precisely, Confucius believed that a just and harmonious society depended on a clear hierarchy, with the ruler at the top. To him, following the exiled duke was about upholding that order,
Right.
even in the face of adversity.
So it wasn't just about personal gain, it was about taking a stand for what he believed in.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another fascinating
I
point.
mentioned earlier that he had this rivalry with Yang Hu, who chose to side with the three Quan families.
Right.
How did that rivalry factor into things?
Well, imagine yourself in Confucius's position. You have this rival who's chosen the seemingly pragmatic path, the one that's likely to bring immediate rewards. Wouldn't you feel a certain drive to prove that your path, the path of principle and loyalty, could ultimately lead to greater success?
I could see how that competitive spirit might have pushed him to take a bigger risk. To show that his way was the right way.
Exactly. And it adds another layer of complexity to understanding of Confucius.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a detached philosopher spouting lofty ideals. He was a human being with ambitions, rivalries, and a desire to make his mark on the world.
It's a reminder that even the most influential figures in history, were driven by a mix of personal and philosophical motives.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes studying history so compelling. It's not just about memorizing dates and names, it's about understanding the motivations and complexities of the people who shaped the course of events.
Okay, so we've established that Confucius's decision to follow the Duke was driven by a combination of loyalty, ambition, and perhaps a dash of rivalry. But he wasn't just a lone scholar making this journey, was he? He had a family to consider.
That's an excellent. Confucius likely took his wife and children with him to Qi. He seems to have been quite eager to find employment upon arriving, suggesting the practical realities of needing to provide for his family.
It humanizes him, doesn't it? It shows that even while pursuing these grand political and philosophical goals, he was still grounded in the everyday concerns of a husband and father.
Absolutely. It's those glimpses into his personal life that make him relatable across millennia.
So he arrives in Qi with his family, hoping to find a position that will allow him to both support them and potentially advance his political career. What happens next? What kind of reception did he receive?
Well, before we get into his experiences in Qi,
Yeah?
there's one more interesting detail from his time in Lu that our source highlights. It involves that study tour we discussed earlier, the one to Luoyang.
Oh, right, the ancient LinkedIn trip where he supposedly met Lao Dan, who was definitely not Laozi. What else did our source reveal about that journey?
Well, it points out that this trip wasn't just a random occurrence.
Okay.
It was actually part of a larger pattern in Confucius's life.
What do you mean?
Throughout his early career, Confucius was constantly seeking out opportunities to connect with influential figures and gain recognition for his knowledge and abilities.
Okay.
The study tour to Luoyang was just one example of this.
So he was already networking and building relationships long before he faced the decision of whether to follow the Duke.
Exactly, and this pattern continues in Qi.
Okay.
Our source emphasizes that Confucius was very strategic in cultivating connections with powerful people, attending social gatherings, and showcasing his expertise on ritual and governance.
It sounds like he was playing the long game, not just relying on his loyalty to the Duke to guarantee him a position. He was actively working to make himself indispensable.
That's a great way to put it. He was creating opportunities for himself,
Yeah.
building a reputation that extended beyond his connection to the exiled Duke.
Okay, so we're seeing a portrait of Confucius as a savvy networker, a skilled politician, and a man deeply committed to his ideals. But we still haven't talked about how his gamble actually played out. Did he find success in Qi? Did the Duke ever return to power?
Well, that's where things get even more intriguing. And unfortunately, that's where we'll have to leave our listeners hanging for now. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore Confucius's experiences in Qi and whether his calculated risk ultimately paid off.
All right, listeners, you heard it here. We're about to uncover the next chapter in Confucius's life and find out if his gamble led to triumph or disappointment. Don't miss the thrilling conclusion to our deep dive. And following his journey from the state of Lu, where he faced a difficult choice, stay or follow the exiled Duke to the state of Qi. It was a gamble, fueled by loyalty, ambition, and maybe even a bit of rivalry.
Yeah, it really was.
But did it pay off?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, as with most things in history, is complicated.
Okay.
Confucius's time in Qi was marked by both successes and setbacks.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Give me the highlights. Did he land a plum government position? Did he become the Duke's right-hand man?
Not quite. While he did manage to secure a position in the Qi court, it wasn't a particularly high-ranking one.
Oh.
He served as an advisor on ritual and governance.
Okay.
But he wasn't exactly shaping policy or wielding major influence.
So not the meteoric rise to power he might have been hoping for?
No, but it wasn't a complete failure either. Remember, Confucius was a master networker. He used his time in Qi to cultivate relationships with influential people, attend social gatherings, and showcase his knowledge.
So he was still playing the long game, even if the immediate rewards weren't as great as he might have imagined.
Exactly, and this is where our source offers a really insightful perspective.
Okay.
It suggests that Confucius's experiences in Qi, both the successes and the setbacks, played a crucial role in shaping his later thinking and teachings.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, think about it. He went to Qi with this idealistic vision of restoring the Duke to power and ushering in an era of good governance, but the reality of court politics was much messier and more complex than he perhaps anticipated.
So he saw firsthand that personal ambition, factionalism, and power struggles could often undermine even the most well-intentioned efforts at reform.
Exactly, and this experience seems to have tempered his idealism,
Yeah.
leading him to develop a more pragmatic and nuanced approach to politics and governance.
So the Confucius who eventually returned to Lu was not the same wide-eyed idealist who had left years earlier.
Precisely. He had been tested by the realities of power and emerged with a deeper understanding of the challenges and compromises involved in governing a state.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like he went through a political boot camp, and it shaped his thinking in profound ways.
That's a great analogy, and this transformation is evident in his later teachings, which emphasize the importance of not just moral principles,
Hmm.
but also practical skills, adaptability, and the ability to navigate complex social and political dynamics.
It's like he learned that being a good ruler, or even a good advisor, wasn't just about having the right ideas,
Right.
but also about knowing how to put those ideas into practice in a messy, imperfect world.
Exactly. And this, I think, is one of the most important takeaways from our deep dive today.
Yeah,
We often view Confucius as this timeless sage dispensing wisdom from on high.
right.
But he was also a product of his time, shaped by his experiences and constantly evolving in his thinking.
He was a real person facing real challenges and learning from his mistakes.
Absolutely. And that, I think, makes his teachings all the more relevant and relatable to us today.
Yeah.
We all face challenges and setbacks in our lives.
Hmm.
The key is to learn from them, adapt, and keep striving to become better versions of ourselves.
So what happened to Confucius after his time in Qi?
Well,
Did he eventually return to Lu? Did his gamble ever pay off?
he did eventually return to Lu, but the Book never remipped power. However, Confucius's experiences in Qi had made him a more mature and seasoned thinker,
Okay.
and he went on to have a profound impact on Chinese thought and culture.
So even though his initial gamble didn't pay off in the way he might have hoped, it ultimately set him on a path to becoming one of the most influential figures in history.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? Sometimes the choices that seem like failures in the moment end up leading us to unexpected and even greater successes.
It's a reminder that life is full of twists and turns, and that even the most carefully laid plans can be upended by unforeseen circumstances. But what matters most is how we learn from our experiences, adapt to change, and continue to pursue our goals with resilience and wisdom.
Well said. And who knows, maybe this deep dive into Confucius's life has inspired some of our listeners to reflect on their own choices, their own ambitions, and their own understanding of loyalty and principle.
To all our deep divers out there, thanks for joining us on this journey through history. We hope it's spiked your curiosity and given you some food for thought. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.